There we go.
3, 2, 1.
Action. Yes, well, welcome to the Randall Report with my partner in crime, of course, the inimitable Melvin Mead Brewnas.
Hi, Simon.
How are you doing today?
Not too bad.
Jolly good, jolly good. So welcome to our first saute into the fray, as it were, of the mercurial world that we live in, where we'll endeavour to engage, entertain and inform the viewers and listeners on a myriad of topics, everything from politics to entertainment, you know, food, travel and a whole lot more. And as it's our first foray, we apologise in advance for any technical glitches. I'm sure there'll be plenty of things that'll bite us in the proverbial bum. But we'll be learning as we go, and hopefully we'll hone something that will be interesting and we can be proud of and you'll want to be a part of. So that's the aim, isn't it?
Let's wait and see how we go.
Yeah, well, there's always that, isn't there? Anyway, naturally, we'd love to hear from you. So there's going to be a number of ways once we've figured it out, how to get in touch, including probably Instagram and Twitter. We've counted TikTok out because
we're a bit too old.
Yeah, and you're 20 years younger than me, I have.
Yeah.
Yes. Isn't there a sort of geriatric version of TikTok? Maybe.
Yeah, Twitter.
Oh, yeah. Facebook. Anyway, we'll repeat these as and when we've got it all sorted out, of course. Now, it's probably a little surprise in respect to the subject for our first foray, as it were, as there's nothing that gets the heckles up like a bit of political discourse. It's been relentlessly covered in the news of late, and that, of course, is Partygate, which seems to have relegated WALLPAPERGATE. Another yet unresolved matter of possible impropriety, all of course pertaining to our Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Yes, those parties or non-parties, the work events with booze and bain-maries and what have you, and suitcases full of wine and music playing and the spinning of decks, while the rest of us have been spun a lot of yarns. What tickles me is, I can't work out in a place where number 10 Downing Street is policed more heavily than any other street in Britain. They somehow didn't know there was any parties going on.
Well, I also suppose they still want a job. So if a few cases of wine end up going down Downing Street, I don't think they'll look too closely at it in the end. So.
Anyway, against the backdrop of a pandemic that's claimed more than 150,000 lives, the British public, of course, have endured more than 2 years of near isolation from normal living, sometimes unable to visit sick or dying relatives to pay their respects in death as one would normally wish to.
Including the Queen.
Well, there's a point, isn't it? Yeah, although one could be forgiven for thinking he died a few years earlier. Sorry. Anyway,
that one
yes, that might not make the edit. Anyway, you know, yeah, people haven't been able to study normally at school or to socialise with their work colleagues or celebrate special occasions with either their workmates or their friends by throwing a party to and dancing the night away. Except, of course, for a privileged few, it seems. Those same people who apparently made the rules and imposed the rules, of course, were, it seems, the same ones who broke the rules and took us all for fools. Not just once, but it appears rather habitually. When caught out and quizzed, Boris Johnson stood up in Parliament a few weeks ago saying he thought there were no parties. And that at those parties that never took place, no rules were broken.
That was his first attempt at honesty.
Yes, but yeah, so it's sort of gone downhill a little bit since then. He hasn't improved his excuses, has he? Now, his denials, I mean, I don't know what to make of this, but denial, of course, old adage, is not just the river that runs through Egypt, it also runs through Downing Street. And it's
a typical Simon joke.
Yes, it is. Yeah. In another life, I'd have been Ronnie Corbett sitting in that chair in the 1980s. It's about too many greens. That's way too
got a bit too tall.
Got a bit too tall.
No one's going to understand that, you do. So I was going to know.
Does anybody know Ronnie Corbett is? Is he? No, perhaps not.
Famous in the 80s.
Famous in the 80s, yes. Infamous, obviously, because it's obviously questionable as it's very PC these days. Well, the two Ronnies. All their sort of chocolatey mouse and, some of their...
Yeah, but in the 80s, it was funny.
It was funny in the 80s.
Today, you can't get away with it.
No.
Back then, it was hilarious.
It was, to be fair. Anyway, is Boris Johnson drowning in denial, or should he be proverbially drowned in denial, is the question. And today's question is, should he stay or should he go? Now, I was going to read a bit of a letter, but I'll read just one paragraph of a letter that was sent to Sir Graham Brady, not by an MP, you understand. This has been from an ordinary citizen. And in writing the letter, they're saying that the recent actions of the current Prime Minister Boris Johnson through the scandals of illicit parties and accusations of impropriety surrounding the refurbishment of his Downing Street apartment and, of course, a number of illicit parties, are compromising the institution of our democracy, and that his actions fall well below the acceptable standards we should expect of a prime minister or any other elected representative. I mean, I'll start by asking you, really, what do you make of that? What do you reckon? Do you think he's fell well below the bar? Which is rather a pun, isn't it? Fell well below the bar.
I mean, it's a question of procedural impropriety, isn't it, really? It goes against, number one, the policies that have been put forward during COVID and lockdowns. So, can't be one rule for us and then one rule for the rest of them, as appears to be the case. Yeah. What we discussed earlier is obviously, I think that the bigger issue is the payments that went towards the apartment. Because obviously it's a question of whether it's taxpayer funded. Oh yes, that really shouldn't have been the case, because obviously it's private residence. It had only been refurbished no more than 8 or 9 years prior anyway.
Well, Theresa May had it refurbished, didn't she, in 2017? Although I've seen the decor, so I can kind of understand why.
But then, do you change it on every changing of the guard? So for every prime minister that enters, does he then get an unlimited budget to then go and sort of refurbish a property as he sees fit?
This is true, given that there's been a few Conservative prime ministers in the last 10 years.
It seems wasteful. But beyond that side, let's have a look at sort of Partygate. It's insensitive at best. I think that's the problem. Whether it's enough for someone to get the sack is another matter altogether.
Yeah, but he's kind of been lying to Parliament, though, isn't he, about it?
Give us a party. If it was a legal matter, I can understand how it'd be more of an issue. Like lying to sort of start a war in Iraq, for example, that might be considered a little bit more serious than lying about attending a party. Both aren't good. Yeah. But they're sort of on balance of things. Should he have lied? No. Did he clearly lie? Yes. He tried to cover it all up. Didn't work. Blew up in his face. Fair enough.
So the lies are worse than the action, really, aren't they?
The lie is worse than the action.
So, but
one time we actually agree on something, I agree with that. The lie is worse
because it is a resignation offence if you mislead Parliament, and clearly he misled Parliament, surely, because he said a few weeks ago that there were no parties.
But it's still a party. Let's take things, more holistically. If it was a lie about something more serious, I can understand it. But it's essentially still one or many parties. It's hardly a big deal. But the fact that he lied to Parliament, he lied to media, the fact that there was a party that was held a day before Prince Philip's funeral, just optically looks horrible. You know, he made his teary apology to the Queen. I'm sure the Queen gave him, you know, 2 barrels worth. You know, and she probably doesn't want him around too much longer either. So I think at this point, they're just looking for a reason to get rid of him. And I think for most of us, we'd probably be quite happy to see him move on and for someone else to take the reins.
Yeah, well,
regardless of who that is.
Yes.
Gove.
Oh God, no.
Or Sunak, as they seem to be the 2 obvious choices now, because they're the only 2 that haven't been openly, you know, for Boris.
Well, Richie sort of did spend 2 minutes answering questions.
Yeah, and then he ran off, didn't he? That's the problem.
Yes, he ran off at the point, funnily enough, where the journalist asked him, did he support Boris?
Yeah, that's when he legged it.
And he legged it. There. So obviously, yeah, it's kind of, you don't think it's necessary a cause for his resignation, or do you? I mean, really, do you think he's gone on a bit too far? That the sort of excuses of
the party element, no. The lying aspect, yes.
Mm.
I think it's enough to damage the party,
yeah,
and to damage his reputation enough that, okay, he shouldn't be sacked. He should just walk away.
So the party,
it will be better for him and for the party and for all of us. The government,
the party, public, meaning the Tory party, not
Tory
the party with the cheese and wine.
No. The Tory party, government, public opinion.
Yes, darling.
It would make. It would look better for him to say, I made a mistake. I understand it didn't look good. Optically, it looks terrible. I'm walking off and I let someone else take the reins.
You see, he should have done, if he'd have done that.
He should have done that, right. If he would have done that, it would have been, okay, you made a mistake. You held your hands up. Thank you very much. Off you go. You know, you can still, you know, as an MP, have a role, but you just won't hold the top spot anymore, which I think is fair enough. But the question is his ego too large to be able to take that step down and then move into a secondary role? And to be honest, he'd still probably have a cabinet position. But is that enough?
Do you think
so.
Do you think if Rishi Sunak took over, it he'd given him a cabinet post?
I think so.
Probably.
Or if not immediately,
put him in charge of the cocktail cabinet.
Yeah. Or if not immediately, within a year or so, they'd find a way to bring him back into the fold in a more significant way.
Then we'd have the prospect, a bit like Trump, of him trying to become leader again.
Foreign secretary or something like that. I don't know.
Hang on a minute. Hang on a minute. Wasn't he foreign secretary once before and got dumped? Yeah, but everyone got sacked.
Everyone deserves a second chance. I think that's what I think.
Yeah. I'm not so sure about whether he deserves a second. He's had a few chances with this one,
absolutely,
really. You know. So, yeah.
Have we answered all the questions already?
No, we haven't. We haven't even got close to it. I'm just thinking where we should go next, because, of course, this week, and in order to try and save his, his political backside, I mean, and let's remember, of course, he's had a bit of a catalogue of clangers. There's been the Partygate, Peppa Pig Gate, where he kind of I don't know what that little ping was. There was Peppa Pig Gate. And where he sort of lost his way, giving some speech, I think, to the CBI. And now this week, in order to try and save his political bacon, there's a good one, trying to save it from the Peppa Pig moment. There's been his 2 policy initiatives, Operation, the code names Operation Red Meat and Operation Save Big Dog. Do you not find them? I mean, for me, I find the actual code names in themselves
hilarious,
a bit grubby, and a bit cynical. Do you think it's a bit sort of a bit obvious the kind of time. And do you think some of the policy initiatives, you know, for instance, the ending of the BBC licenses, as they've tried to intimate, is going to happen in a few years, and sending the Navy out into the Channel to you know, kind of push the migrant boats back the other way, which of course is
using sonic weapons, apparently, which is the latest technology that they plan on using. It's directed, what are they called? Directed energy systems.
Oh, what does that do then?
So they have essentially this technology whereby you can direct sound waves or microwaves even at a particular point. And if you direct it, let's say at a dinghy, for example, that's trying to cross the channel,
yeah,
it essentially creates such a jarring noise that people will just essentially try to exit from that particular wave pattern. And it's, I mean, it's enough to be so uncomfortable that you basically try to move out of the path of this sonic wave.
I thought they'd have had the same effect paying a few Ed Sheeran records over a tunnel.
No, that's Guantanamo.
Oh, right. So this is what they're talking about,
yeah,
using some kind of
non-lethal
directed,
yeah,
annoyance,
directed,
basically,
yeah,
that would make all of this would make people who have travelled already sort of 5,000 or 6,000 miles to get to the French bit of the English Channel, suddenly, having got halfway across to Dover, change their mind and go all the way back again.
I don't think you have much of a choice when you're actually
that bad.
Yeah, when you're affected by these waves. Yeah, that's it.
Oh my God.
I mean, sometimes they do it to frequencies that are enough to make you feel sick. You know, these things are
wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so
it's serious enough.
Using technology.
Yeah,
I suppose. Yeah. Can't they just sort of
shot them out of the water? No.
Stick a pin in their blow up boats and see them fart their way back at high speed back to Calais.
The real question is who's providing these boats in the first place?
Well,
on
yeah.
a complete tangent.
Is that illegal though? I mean, you know, if somebody wants to pay you to get in a you know,
and it's a lot of
pay
money
to get in a boat that somebody's hiring, obviously there's health and safety issue. You know, 50 in a boat that's suitable for 10. Is that actually illegal in itself? Is that why these so-called gangs, they can't really prosecute? Because are they technically? Is it? I don't know. I mean, is it illegal?
The police in France, aren't doing anything about it. So for the 10 boats that go out, they might stop one. But their view is they need to maintain the safety of the immigrants that are trying to cross over.
Yeah.
So they're more than happy to have them get on a boat, head out to sea, because in their view, you know, the UK Coast Guard, the UK Navy will then pick them up and bring them in.
Okay.
My point is this:
we could do a swap.
Each one of these poor people are paying upwards of 10,000
€10,000,
£10,000 a time to get onto these boats to travel across. Where do they get that money from?
That's a good point.
I mean, per person, it's an awful lot of money. These traffickers are making millions out of this. Yeah. But yet, very few prosecutions.
When are we going to open our business?
That will also get cut out.
So that's the wrong one for the edit. Oh, of course, they're coming a different way. But we could do a swap. We'll take 10 migrants. You can have Boris Johnson.
I don't think that will work.
I'm Priti Patel. That's a fair swap for 100 migrants, I would have thought. But they wouldn't take them, would they? No, they'd turn them straight back. I know. If it was the other way and boots on the other foot, I would. So do you think, obviously, that that's not going to work? You know, there's these, you know, what do you think the initiatives are? Do you think they're going to work? Going back to Boris, these things of you know, turning the migrants back, and the BBC, and then this thing of the red meat, which I assume is to do with the MPs and the levelling up. And what do you make, of course, with, I think 350 people died yesterday from COVID within 28 days of getting a positive result in the hospitals. Do you think sort of getting rid of all of the restrictions is a wise plan right now? Do you think that's not a bit sort of dog whistle politics?
Yeah, I think the timing is clear. You know, Boris is having a hard time. They need to divert away from this particular subject. Therefore, you know, let's reduce restrictions, not only because obviously it's a distraction technique, but cases seem to be falling, you know, 10% odds every few days. You know, so I mean, there's this big push to get people back in, get people back into the office. Most people, at least from my understanding, don't want to go back to the office because they've experienced working from home. They understand, you know, the cost savings involved in doing so. Now, obviously, we're looking at inflation rates skyrocketing.
Yeah,
we're talking 4.5%, 5%,
5.4%. I think it highest in 30 years.
Exactly, highest in 30 years.
Yeah.
So we're being there. So the general public are being squeezed at every possible turn. Are we now saying, you know, get on an inefficient, expensive public transport system, go back to work? Why would you put your employees through that when it's completely unnecessary? So many people, by the way, just to end on this point, so many major companies are already operating a hybrid model because they know that it's better for their staff.
Yeah.
You know, it tends to be more or less better for productivity as well. You know, you offer people flexibility, which is vitally important, particularly in this world.
So surely then we should be, by that token, then, instead of coming up with Operation Safe Big Dog and Operation Red Meat and all these kind of weird code names, wouldn't it be better for them to address the issues of the huge heights in energy prices that are about to floor everybody? Not least those people working from home, of course, who've got to have the heating on while they're sitting at the desk. I mean, there is a, you know, they're not paying for the bus fare and the train fare into the offices in the city centres, but they've got to keep the heat on at home while they're working from their desk. So it's a bit of a,
this is a trade-off.
It's a double-edged sword, isn't it?
This is a trade-off. Is it? The trade-off is between the well-being of your citizens versus injecting, you know, revenue back into the economy, as in getting money back into TfL, you know, through fares,
yes,
train, tube, buses, etc.
They're losing a packet at the moment.
They're losing a fortune off of that. Local shops and services close to commercial centres, which are losing out because obviously if more people are working from home, fewer people are going into town, fewer people are buying lunches, shopping, buying clothes and services in you know, direct areas close to commercial centres, City of London, West End, Canary Wharf, because these places are half dead zones now. People aren't going there anymore.
Yeah, well, of course, they haven't suffered enough.
My issue is, why are we forcing the subject? If this is a sort of a new reality where we are all living more locally and sort of living and working within our own sort of little communities now, why then force us to go back into a world that we don't particularly feel comfortable in?
Yes, I think the pandemic's kind of changed the people's thinking, hasn't it? A lot.
I don't. Things aren't going to go back to what we consider normal anymore. I don't think that's the case.
I agree with you there. I think that's game over. With all of this kind of, you know, these attempts at distracting us from Partygate, and to be fair, Partygate's kind of distracted everybody from I think what is probably the deeper issue of WALLPAPERGATE and the issue of the flat redecoration.
Misappropriation of funds, exactly.
What do you make of kind of this whole mantra that's been that Boris and his cabinet have been sort of using this last week about waiting for this inquiry by this inquiry. It isn't an inquiry because, let's face it, it's a fact-finding mission. So, but by Sue Gray, I mean, it's not going to be an independent kind of inquiry with the suggestion of what should happen as a consequence. It's just going to in fact, my understanding of it is that the supply of emails, texts, and other pertinent information is not something that the individuals, unless they wish to, are forced to hand over. So does it have any teeth? And the idea of waiting for that report from a civil servant that's employed by the government, you know, ultimately, he then has to decide, the Prime Minister decides what action is to be taken. So how can he tell himself off?
Well, the question is whether there's any criminality. If there's no evident criminality, then there's no point in having, you know, this inquiry, or an inquiry that, like you said, there's any teeth. That's the point. This is, as you said, it's a fact-finding mission. Well, it's to see whether
they kind of built it as an inquiry, though, haven't they? Really, like it, you know, it's going to have teeth, and out of it is going to be some kind of real, you know, real answers. When there's going to be bugger all, isn't there?
Okay, fine. So, what are the real answers, and then what are the consequences?
Well, we know there was a part. I don't think we need we need the fact-finding mission to tell us that there were parties. And we don't need to work out that Boris Johnson was at some of those parties, because we know he's admitted he was. He just didn't know they were outside the rules. And he didn't, apparently, for the one on the 20th of May, for a good 20, 25 minutes, know that it was a party.
But okay, fine. But then what?
You know?
What's the consequence of this then?
Well, surely it's just a fudge.
Yeah, but this is my point. So you do the inquiry. He's already admitted that he was at some of these events. And now what?
He gets to tell himself off.
Yeah, but what's the consequence?
Well, that's my point.
What would you like to be the consequence?
Well, frankly, I don't think. Well, I think we've heard enough.
Do we strip him naked and, you know?
Oh, that's an ugly thought.
Strip him naked and walk him down the street, you know, and shout shame? No. Or do we just let him get on with it?
I feel sorry for anybody who has to see him with his clothes off, personally.
I mean, ultimately,
it's not a lot.
Ultimately, like you said before, I think it's the line that's worse.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think we've heard enough for the denials he made actually at the dispatch box in the Houses of Parliament, without Sue Gray's input. To say enough is enough. I mean, David Davis said it this week when he said, "For God's sake, go." I mean, doesn't that say it all when it comes from a Tory grandee that you know, whether you love him or hate him, David Davis is, you know, is in fact, he was a supporter of Boris's through Brexit. I think he was the Brexit minister. So for him to say, "For God's sake, go," it's a bit damning, isn't it? Isn't it a bit time up? The party's over. The party that never happened.
But the problem is, it's a few overt comments and too many others that remain silent. This is the issue. Is if it was a much larger majority of MPs that openly wanted his head. Obviously, you know, they were trying to do both.
There's never this, yes, there's never it's never open, because you send your letters to Sir Graham Brady,
and nothing happened.
And well, it has to reach a certain number. I think it's 54.
Yeah, and they haven't got anywhere near it.
And
it fizzled out to nothing.
Yeah, but of course, you've had there's this now accusations from the statement read by William Ragg yesterday. Of intimidation and bullying and possible blackmail even. I mean, isn't this now creating another
unsubstantiated?
Well, there's obviously there's been one person that's already come forward on this, and that's the person that crossed the floor of the House on Wednesday. And there's actually said that that was one of the reasons he crossed the floor of the House in the end, because he was being essentially blackmailed for his vote in terms of the business of the vote of no confidence.
You also have to
for a secondary school in his constituents.
You also have to assume if he jumps ship that he has ulterior motives for saying what he has. You know, let's be clear. Let's be clear. If he's willing to change parties,
yeah,
you know, then you have to also assume that there's things being done behind the scenes, you know, whereby he needs to be seen to either be seen as victimized, or there was some other negative connotations behind his move that justified him moving to the Labour Party. So I wouldn't take what he says. He didn't
get an invite to the parties.
Maybe he didn't get, yeah, maybe he wasn't invited to the party. And he was like, you know what, forget this, I'm off.
I think, well, the burning question I have is, did they have one of those foil hedgehogs with the cocktail sticks and the pineapple and cheddar cheese?
Yeah, Simon, you're stuck in the 80s. No one knows what that is. So let's just move on.
In the 1970s, actually. 1970s.
Yeah, you know, most of our listeners might not even have been born.
If you were born in the, if you were around in the 1970s, and you'd have gone out for dinner, you'd have, I can tell you, you'd have had prawn cocktail for starters, steak, chips, peas, and maybe half a fried tomato on the side for main course, and Black Forest Gatto for dessert. I remember those days in the 70s. Just kind of standard.
Is there a point to this?
There's no point at all. Just no fucking point at all, to be honest. But I just thought, what kind of things were at those? But I mean,
next question.
Ban Marie's. I mean, very few parties I've been to, they've had a Ban Marie. I don't know what I've necessarily been missing. I don't know what was in the Ban Marie.
Yeah, what was in it?
I think that's the bigger question. So, yeah. So we know that Boris went into the garden on the 20th to the party that he thought was a work event, and he didn't know it was a party, even though he stayed for about 20-25 minutes. And then in hindsight, he said, I think that was probably last week. In hindsight, he said he wished them lucky. He'd sort of gone, oh no, you've all got to go home. You've all got to come in. That's it. Oh, you know, this is not good. And then this week it was, he didn't know the rules.
Yeah.
Which I find a bit implausible, since he made the rules in the first place. Don't you think all of this makes him look like such a complete wally that you wouldn't really want to trust him with running the country? In fact, you'd be a bit concerned if he was running the school tuck shop.
I agree. I'm not going to disagree with that. I think it looks incredibly shallow, to be honest. You know, to backtrack on what is so blatantly clear to most of us. You know, you're sort of digging yourself into an ever deepening hole, and it doesn't seem to make any sense. You may as well just, from the start, you know, admit your errors and then move on. This wouldn't have been in the papers for a week.
It's true.
Right. If this wasn't just, you know, accepted, apologized for.
It's kind of Boris, though, isn't it? Because he's never apologized. You know, he called gay men bum boys in tank tops all that time ago in an article, and black people as having as being pickaninnies with watermelon smiles, and still refused to directly apologize for the language that he'd used, and has consistently refused to apologize. And obviously there's
it's an extreme insensitivity. It is also, at least in my belief, somewhat cultural, based on sort of his upbringing, his education, you know, the circles that he may sort of socialize within, that some of these terms might be acceptable within those circles, but to the rest of us, no. No, you might, but it's an insensitivity. It's a level of ignorance you would name.
I mean, for me, it's downright homophobic and racist. Personally, that's the way I see it.
That's the other side of the coin.
No, I think it's just a bit.
But I'm also more one for giving people a little bit of leeway. It's like I can understand from him and his upbringing why those terms might come to pass. Whether I think it was done with prejudice and racism in mind, I'm not so sure. But it's still highly insensitive.
I mean, you think he was just being a bit of a dick without realizing the consequence of his, but you know,
I don't know, and we won't know. You know, we'd have to speak to him one-on-one to understand understand his tone. We don't.
Surely
know,
wouldn't he have been better off apologise for it and saying, look, you know, it was inappropriate, and that he shouldn't have done that. Well, but he hasn't. It seems to me he has an inability to eat a bit of humble pie. I mean, even in his personal life, he seems to have a great difficulty. He's got great difficulty adding up the number of children he's got. But that's a whole other story. Anyway, well, it's there we have it. Brexit Boris. The man who wrote 2 letters, one expounding the virtues of leaving the EU, and one expounding the virtues of staying. So more shilly-shallying before placing his bet on which one he would serve him best, rather than being guided by the virtues of the issues at hand. And I think that kind of sums up his approach to the whole issue of Partygate, Wallpapergate. It seems to be all about him and nobody else, which I think is really probably the problem. And then, of course, his first attempt at the leadership of the party, which was, of course, unsuccessful, because Michael Gove, amongst others, said described him as not being up to the job. And funnily enough, obviously, Michael Gove is a bit absent at the moment. I haven't seen hide nor hair of him this last week.
I think we said this before, right? Between him and Sunak.
I know Liz Truss is fancying a pop at she's in Australia at the moment, and I'm sure there's a lot of people that wish she'd stay there.
Yeah, I don't think anyone else is willing to give her a pop. I think that's the issue.
Yeah.
let's be
but you know, Boris did wind up with an 80-seat majority at the last election. I mean, that's got to be, I suppose, worth something. How quickly the fortunes turn, eh?
Can we be very clear with this 80-seat majority very quickly?
Yeah.
If it wasn't for the Brexit,
while you're doing that, I'm going to have one of these. Would you want to?
I don't want. All right,
I do think they would have been better with the creme patting. Yeah, go on.
I don't know what I was going to say now.
Well, I'd mentioned that
the 80-seat majority.
Yes.
That if it wasn't for the Brexit issue, he probably wouldn't have had those numbers. So let's be clear. There was a major impasse. It was the defining moment of our history. You know, things were sort of stuck in a quagmire. I think Brexit was called a quagmire at the time because we couldn't find an impasse. We couldn't find a way to sort of move on.
Yeah.
You know, May left, Boris came in, there was a change of guard, and we managed to push things through. Whether we can agree or disagree to how things have moved on beyond that is another story altogether.
Yep.
But at least it got us out of a difficult moment.
I suppose.
And just for that, we should at least thank him for that.
Well, depends on your point of view. I'd sooner have, that's a party I sooner would have stayed at, being in the EU.
That's not what the majority of the British public felt. Though, so.
No, you know, we have to live with the result
of democracy. Yes.
Yeah. It's a pity, of course, because a lot of the things that they claimed would happen. Didn't happen, like the 40 trade deals that were ready and waiting, which seem to have slipped mysteriously through their fingers.
Yeah, but yeah, you say that there. We're also not living through sort of a Mad Max scene either. We're not sort of chopping people's heads off the toilet roll yet. You know, so for now, we're okay. Things could have gone much, much worse, and they haven't for now. So let's be happy that we're still in our warm homes, eating choquette and doing podcasts.
Although having said that, I do need to go to the supermarket near enough every day, because 2 days out of every 3 our supermarket hasn't got any toilet roll.
Really?
Yeah. It was 2.5 weeks. There was no sunflower oil.
Must be a particular issue of this part of London.
In case you're wondering, we're in the east. The poor bit of the hood.
Right.
So with all this barrage of Boris controversy, from parties to fridges and flat refurbishments to mates that are pole dancers, is this one pole that's too slippery even for Boris to cling on to? And
tune in next week to find out.
Has Boris? Yes, has bouncing Boris's balls finally dropped once too often? With them not only lost their bounce, but dangling perilously low, perhaps lower than even mine. Yeah, well, I guess we'll find out. And if he does happen to survive, of course, as Prime Minister, then it's going to all fall to you to vote him out before, to stop him having another term. And that's only you, the great British public, that might end up being the ones to cogitate and consider whether he's worthless or worthy of another term indeed. So, yeah, might be having to wait until to put that cross in the right box. And but anyway, until next time, from Mel and I, be kind to yourselves and to each other.